Hello and welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to yet another talk on the ego. We're going to be looking at how the ego works exactly. Now, in the previous file I uploaded, I talked about how the ego is the place or the voice from which all desires are born, all wants, all false needs, etc., etc. I say false needs because the ego has a way of leading us to believe that we need something, we absolutely need it, but in actual fact, we don't. It's just this perpetual voice going over and over and over in our minds, telling us that we need something, but it's not necessarily what we need is not necessarily what the ego is telling us that we need. Now, to actually see how the ego works and how it functions and how your ego works, an excellent technique is to deprive yourself of whatever it is you think you're attached to or whatever it is you are actually attached to. And in my case, I think my whole life struggle has been with food. Coming from a very European family, and especially having a part Sicilian family, food in Sicily is well, for Italians in general, it's sacred. Meal times are the time that the whole family gets together and you sit down and you have lunch and everybody tells the stories of how their day went or how their day's gone so far, and everybody discusses what needs discussing. Problems are solved, you come together as a family, there's unity, there's love, there's laughter, there's food can be associated with so many things, but the main thing is family, home, love, warmth, and all the other things that are associated with that connection we have with other people. And I think as I grew up more and more, and as life took me further and further away from my family, both physically, emotionally, and lovingly, if you like, then the more I noticed that I used food as comfort in a certain way. It's not just comfort. I think if you've never had a food addiction, then you probably won't get where I'm coming from. But I think that at some point or another, everybody in their entire life has had some kind of addiction or used something, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sexual activity, whether it's food or thinking too much or over-analysing things. Everybody has had at some point something that the ego has attached itself to make life seem more, not bearable because that would be the wrong word, but more comforting, if you like, or I'll think of a word for that. But coming back to the food, in my particular case, I would eat if I was happy because I would reward myself, maybe have a chocolate bar because I'm rewarding myself. Actually, I'm not really a massive fan of chocolate, but let's say chocolate for argument's sake. If I was sad, then I would use I would use food as comfort. So, I'd eat. If I was sad, I'd go for food. If I was contemplative, I'd go for food. Food seems to be the answer for everything. And why is that? Why should food be the answer for everything? Well, again, as I tried to explain earlier, the way we work as human beings, and this is only my personal opinion, I don't expect you to take anything on board, but if you just consider the idea and then find anything useful in it, then I hope it helps you on your journey. Otherwise, just please go and find what works for you. Don't take my word for any of this. But what I found is that we interpret the world according to a set of symbols or symbolism. We associate meaning to things, and when we associate meaning to something, then it's because we're working from a place of symbology. And in my case, food the symbology of food was that representation again, like I mentioned earlier, of family, of warmth, of love, of coming together, unitedness. And so food became that central focal point of subconsciously going back to those moments of happiness, to those moments of contentment, to those moments of peace within the soul, which obviously were those moments that were spent having shared lunches with my family or my grandparents. And I think we're very much the same, all of us, in that respect. So, of course, whenever the ego was having those moments of experiencing different emotions, because the ego creates those emotions, and that will be the topic of the next video that I do, it would have me reaching for food to find that place of solace, if you like. Now, of course, the only way to stop the ego from getting what it wants and being in control of me and my mind is to deprive it. And the only way I could deprive it is by fasting. Again, this is only my personal experience. In fact, for years I've been dabbling with juice fasting and different things, but for a few months now I've been practicing intermittent fasting. And this is when I say, if you really want to see what your ego's made of, deprive it of the one thing it's attached to. Because the ego, when you deprive it of what it really, really wants, what it desires so deeply, the ego creates a resistance. It starts creating a different set of emotions. And the biggest one is fear. A fear of loss. You know, if you take away food, if you start fasting, you know, after all these years of the ego being satisfied with the one thing that it thought would make it happy, you know, it suddenly goes into panic mode. It's like, well, hang on a minute, you're not satisfying me anymore. You're not giving in to my desire. And so therefore you start starving the ego of the satisfaction. And eventually you do this once and twice, 1 day, 2 days, a week, a month. And all of a sudden, my personal experience again is you suddenly realize that you can live without these very attachments. You can live without feeding the ego. And the ego all of a sudden starts thinking, well, hang on a minute. Or not even the ego. I don't know if it's the ego that starts responding in a different way or whether it's we start seeing it from a different point of view. But all of a sudden there's this calmness. After the fear passes and the ego doesn't get its way, it's like a child. This is the only thing I can describe it as. It's like a child. You know, the child wants a toy, it wants a toy, it wants a toy. But when you show it there is another way that it can be happy without this toy, which has been its primal focus because the child only thinks it can be happy with that toy. If you show the child there is another way to be happy without having that toy, then the child creates its own peace. It becomes at peace, you know. And it's the same with us. The same with me in this particular instance. And so all of a sudden I find myself in control of my ego and not my ego in control of me. And as a beautiful consequence, I am able to control when I eat, how I eat, what I eat. And I suddenly find myself eating to survive and not surviving to eat, if that makes sense. And also, of course, without having to satisfy the ego's demands, I also find myself losing weight, which is a beautiful side effect. I find that I have no anxiety around food. The lack of food does not produce anxiety anymore. And perhaps this is also a great thing for dieters. You know, if anybody's struggling with weight, perhaps that's exactly what needs to be overcome. The ego. If we overcome the ego, we can overcome addictions. But again, that's just my personal opinion, and I think that you would need to find that out for yourself. I think it may be safe to say that all addictions come from attachments, and all attachments come from the ego. So once we control the ego, we control our attachments and we control our addictions. Anyway, that's enough for today. Thank you very much once again for listening. And again, don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends if you find anything of interest in what I have to say. Have a beautiful day.